Chapter 25. Influencing the crowd. Success in business, in the last analysis, turns upon touching the imagination of crowds. The reason that preachers in this present generation are less successful in getting people to want goodness than businessmen are in getting them to want motorcars, hats, and pianolas is that businessmen as a class are more close and desperate students of human nature and have boned down harder to the art of touching the imaginations of the crowds. Gerald Stanley Lee, Crowds. In the early part of July 1914, a collection of Frenchmen in Paris, or Germans in Berlin, was not a crowd in a psychological sense. Each individual had his own special interests and needs, and there was no powerful common idea to unify them. A group then represented only a collection of individuals. A month later, any collection of Frenchmen or Germans formed a crowd. Patriotism, hate, a common fear, a pervasive grief, had unified the individuals. The psychology of the crowd is far different from the psychology of the personal members that compose it. The crowd is a distinct entity. Individuals restrain and subdue many of their impulses at the dictates of reason. The crowd never reasons. It only feels. As persons, there is a sense of responsibility attached to our actions which checks many of our incitements, but the sense of responsibility is lost in the crowd because of its numbers. The crowd is exceedingly suggestible and will act upon the wildest and most extreme ideas. The crowd mind is primitive and will cheer plans and perform actions which its members would utterly repudiate. A mob is only a highly wrought crowd. Ruskin's description is fitting. You can talk a mob into anything, its feelings may be, usually are, fond, the whole, generous and right, but it has no foundation for them, no hold of them. You may tease or tickle it into anything at your pleasure. It thinks by infection, for the most part, catching an opinion like a cold, and there is nothing so little that it will not roar itself wild about, when the fit is on. Nothing so great but it will forget in an hour when the fit is past. 29. History will show us how the crowd mind works. The medieval mind was not given to reasoning. The medieval man attached great weight to the utterance of authority. His religion touched chiefly the emotions. These conditions provided a rich soil for the propagation of the crowd mind when, in the 11th century, flagellation, a voluntary self-scourging, was preached by the monks, substituting flagellation for reciting penitential psalms was advocated by the reformers. A scale was drawn up, making 1,000 strokes equivalent to 10 psalms, or 15,000 to the entire psalter. This craze spread by leaps and crowds. Flagellant fraternities sprang up. Priests carrying banners led through the streets great processions, reciting prayers and whipping their bloody bodies with leathern thongs fitted with 4 iron points. Pope Clement denounced this practice, and several of the leaders of these processions had to be burned at the stake before the frenzy could be uprooted. All Western and Central Europe was turned into a crowd by the preaching of the Crusaders, and millions of the followers of the Prince of Peace rushed to the Holy Land to kill the heathen. Even the children started on a crusade against the Saracens. The mob spirit was so strong that home affections and persuasion could not prevail against it, and thousands of mere babes died in their attempts to reach and redeem the sacred sepulchre. In the early part of the 18th century, the South Sea Company was formed in England. Britain became a speculative crowd. Stock in the South Sea Company rose from 128.5 points in January to 550 in May, and scored 1,000 in July. 5 million shares were sold at this premium. Speculation ran riot. Hundreds of companies were organized. One was formed for a wheel of perpetual motion. Another never troubled to give any reason at all for taking the cash of its subscribers. It merely announced that it was organized for a design which will hereafter be promulgated. Owners began to sell, the mob caught the suggestion, a panic ensued, the South Sea Company stock fell 800 points in a few days, and more than $1 billion evaporated in this era of frenzied speculation. The burning of the witches at Salem, the Klondike gold craze, and the 48 people who were killed by mobs in the United States in 1913 are examples familiar to us in America. The crowd must have a leader. The leader of the crowd or mob is its determining factor. He becomes self-hypnotized with the idea that unifies its members. His enthusiasm is contagious, and so is theirs. The crowd acts as he suggests. The great mass of people do not have any very sharply drawn conclusions on any subject outside of their own little spheres, but when they become a crowd they are perfectly willing to accept ready-made, hand-me-down opinions. They will follow a leader at all costs. In labor troubles they often follow a leader in preference to obeying their government. In war they will throw self-preservation to the bushes and follow a leader in the face of guns that fire 14 times a second. The mob becomes shorn of willpower and blindly obedient to its dictator. The Russian government, recognizing the menace of the crowd mind to its autocracy, formerly prohibited public gatherings. History is full of similar instances. How the crowd is created. Today the crowd is as real a factor in our socialized life as are magnates and monopolies. It is too complex a problem merely to damn or praise it. It must be reckoned with and mastered. The present problem is how to get the most and the best out of the crowd spirit, and the public speaker finds this to be peculiarly his own question. His influence is multiplied if he can only transmute his audience into a crowd. His affirmations must be their conclusions. This can be accomplished by unifying the minds and needs of the audience and arousing their emotions. Their feelings, not their reason, must be played upon. It is up to him to do this nobly. Argument has its place on the platform, but even its potencies must subserve the speaker's plan of attack to win possession of his audience. Reread the chapter on feeling and enthusiasm. It is impossible to make an audience a crowd without appealing to their emotions. Can you imagine the average group becoming a crowd while hearing a lecture on dry fly fishing or on Egyptian art? On the other hand, it would not have required world-famous eloquence to have turned any audience in Ulster, in 1914, into a crowd by discussing the Home Rule Act. The crowd spirit depends largely on the subject used to fuse their individualities into one glowing whole. Note how Antony played upon the feelings of his hearers in the famous funeral oration given by Shakespeare in Julius Caesar. From murmuring